well, indeed, the whole forum, is Conor Mackinnon, and he will be speaking on historical fiction in historical reconstruction.
Beautiful. Thanks for all of the kind of amazing presentations we've had so far. It's been great to have a lot of art history presented, as this presentation is going to be kind of reversing that in being art about history. So kind of responding to that question of looking at the history of crises and kind of the role of art in understanding that. I'm interested in the reconstruction of history, and so understanding those kind of historical crises. And I see history is filled with many accounts of major crises. It feels like big events, wars, natural disasters, pandemics fill that historical record. And kind of their large scale or universal nature kind of provide the appearance of kind of a full picture of those experiences. But you know, I think with a closer look, there's unknowns, there's gaps, and that's where I think the reconstruction comes in to start looking at that. And kind of more specifically, that the act of time and how it others us from these histories. And so what can we do to kind of bridge those gaps and access those unknowns? And I think the kind of the first act that I kind of participated in an engaged way in kind of a reconstruction, in kind of a unconventional way, were 1812 reenactments. So for those who don't know, southwestern Ontario and kind of the northeast of the United States in 1812 battled with Indigenous allyship on both sides. So in southwestern Ontario, you know, in the summers, there's avid groups that participate in reenactments of these kind of battles and things. So I did this with my grandfather. We didn't really go for the soldiering and the battling ourselves, but what we did do is create a merchant. We were camp followers. So we would create objects and kind of replica things and sell them to reenactors. And so this was kind of our setup, so we'd camp out for the weekends, kind of in this kind of historical setting. And then, you know, during the week or when we weren't kind of out doing this, we would be building these objects. So things like canteens and boxes and lots of wood things, some metal and forging and things like that. And it was an interesting process to go through, as they are reconstructions. You know, they are not perfect replicas, although we did follow photos, you know, from museum collections or from paintings or etchings, things like that. But a lot of it was kind of a type of experimental archaeology. When we were out there camping out, using the tools that, you know, theoretically would be at our disposal, with the materials, what things did we find that we needed? Right, clothes pegs and things like that. So creating these things, but that was balanced. That was balanced with kind of the as part of these events, there would be the plastic police. They'd come around looking for any plastic objects or anything that wasn't necessarily period accurate, and you know, tell you to put it away, anything like that. So there's a balancing between fictionalizing imagination and kind of and legitimizing and authentication. So that's an important aspect for my current work. I'm looking a lot at historical fiction as a literary form and how that kind of type of fictionalization, you know, real people, real events, real places kind of woven together with fictional people, fictional events, and a fictional narrative. So the process that I've been going through here, this is one of the first works. I was on residency in Lisbon in the fall, and I found this on the left-hand side there. It's a gilded piece of wood. I found it in one of the flea markets. So I wanted to reconstruct this object as a type of historical fiction. So on the right side, there's a 3D scan, which I've started from. Looking at other reference material, there was a great book I also found at the flea market. And then, these are the things I'm seeing in museums and kind of religious centers as well. So I create these reconstructions digitally. I create these algorithms. So on the right-hand side, it's kind of a bit of a zoomed out, but it just represents kind of the way that I'm doing it. So it's not a programmed language. It's working with curves and surfaces, 3D digital surfaces and curves, and extracting information from them, reconstructing it into the next step. So on that representational kind of model on the other side there, that little fragment just turns into the foot of that object. But again, it's going back to that plastic police. It's about balancing it. Like in the historical fictions, there is fictional elements, but the reason I go towards them and I take a lot of entertainment out of them is that there is some authenticity or connection there that both entertains and educates. Not, when I say educate, not in the sense that it's a database of facts that I can later reference, but it's that othering of time, that it's giving us access to time in a way that those facts might not allow on their own. So once those 3D models are created, they're then produced through digital fabrication. In this case, they are 3D printed and then gilded. A few examples there. So I just wanted to go back and reference some work that came before the current kind of historical reconstructions, these historical fictions. As I was really inspired by Jeffrey's Series 6 works, in that they are sourced from this kind of material, and it's an evolution of forms. So these works I was interested in kind of how variation enters into replication and kind of the evolutionary drift that can occur biologically, and I was interested to see how that could be represented in kind of a material culture. So a big part of what I do is, in these reconstructions, is that it's happening digitally. Let me just scooch over here. And there's a text that I've been referencing a lot in a lot of my thinking about this. It's called Making Things and Drawing Boundaries. It's edited by Gentry Sayers. And the chapter in particular that I've been focusing on is called Making the Model, Scholarship and Rhetoric in 3D Historical Reconstructions. So pretty on the nose for what I'm doing. It's mostly focused on architectural work. But one of the quotes is, each step of building a model, the researcher must select and disregard information, weighing its validity and pertinence to the research being addressed. And what this text kind of goes on to say is that in the process of creating a 3D model, a 3D reconstruction, you're doing so with a very fine-tooth comb. When it's a written reconstruction of something historical, let's say, it may articulate that there's a chamfer, let's say, on a brick or on this building. But what does that chamfer look like? When I'm making the model, I need to make a choice between, is it a flat chamfer? Is it even on both ends? Is it rounded? What's the size? And so that act, it forces me to start fictionalizing. But it also forces me to start interpreting potentially the outcomes of those different choices, right? So this rounded curve could mean that they're being cast. If it's a sharper chamfer, then it's possibly that it's being produced a different way. So those are kind of some of the implications that I start to think about, and that fictionalization can be productive in. And then the other kind of excellent thing about working digitally is that it allows me to use artifacts, historical artifacts, as a material in a way that important artifacts and historical objects, often you can't even take them out of the museum. And so I was given a great opportunity for an exhibition I was doing in Port Moody, BC, just outside of Vancouver. And these two objects here, this one and this one, I found in the collection in kind of disparate parts of the collection, but that they had the same accession number. So I knew that they kind of belonged together, and I wanted to reconstruct the machine that they could have belonged to, this piece of equipment that never entered the collection. So this is its kind of representation here that I've developed partially algorithmically and partially just going in with my own imagination to further develop and embellish what I imagine these two little pieces here could have come from. So so in this work again, it's in the creation of it, and again thinking about making those connections and in what the fictionalizing can aid in understanding in reducing that othering. So the process that I use to produce many of the parts for this machine here is CNC milling. So it's like a drill bit that's controlled by the computer. It moves around and kind of cuts out the form for you. But in the way that it can only work in that kind of one dimension up and down, it produces forms that are similar to something that would be cast in like a sand casting process, something that would have been historically used to create this era of machinery. And so there's something that I now need to build into these objects that I'm creating, and start thinking in the same way that the designer of this machine would have originally through this kind of fictional act. And just a quick taste, a quick teaser for what I'm working on next. I've got this really exciting new 3D printer filament that it's embedded with bronze powder. So on the top is allegedly a handle from a Greek vessel, 500 BC. I bought it off a guy on Facebook Marketplace, so who knows? And then below is that reproduction that I've created. So I'm going to be reconstructing this vessel in various formats. But just to kind of wrap it up here, while the histories that I've chosen to reconstruct and explore, they're small, they're individual, and not inherently about crises. Other than that, often many of them are broken and fragmented. It's the potential of this fictional and going beyond just speculation, bringing in imagination and actively fictionalizing in the reconstructive process to create something new and potentially useful in reconstructions, whether that be small histories like these or major historical crises.